Jake Sullivan woke up in a cell that looked like it was made of crystal. His head hurt, and his left shoulder felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. The walls around him glowed with a soft blue light that made everything look strange and cold. He tried to remember how he got here, but the memories came back slowly like pieces of a broken puzzle. The battle at Europa Station had been fierce. Jake remembered his ship getting hit by enemy fire and spinning out of control. He remembered trying to reach the escape pods while alarms screamed all around him. Then everything went black, and now he was here in this weird prison cell somewhere, in space. Jake stood up carefully and looked around. The cell was small but clean. There was a bed that felt more like a stone slab and a strange device in the corner that he guessed was supposed to be a toilet. The walls were smooth and there were no visible doors or windows. He pressed his hands against the crystal walls, but they felt solid and warm to the touch. Days passed and Jake saw no one. Food appeared through a slot in the wall twice a day. It tasted terrible, but it kept him alive. The silence was the worst part. Jake had been a soldier for 15 years, and he was used to noise and action. This quiet was driving him crazy. On the 5th day, everything changed. The wall in front of him suddenly became see-through like glass, and Jake could see a long hallway beyond it. 3 creatures walked toward his cell, and Jake got his first close look at his captors. They were tall and walked on 2 legs like humans, but that was where the similarity ended. Their skin looked like the shell of a crab, but purple and shiny. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and their faces were long and narrow with large black eyes that seemed to see everything. Jake had heard about the Zenthari in military briefings, but seeing them up close was different. The middle creature was bigger than the others and wore what looked like a crown made of black metal. When he spoke, his voice was deep and made a clicking sound between words. Jake did not understand the language, but somehow the meaning came through clearly in his head. "Human soldier," the big creature said, and Jake realized they must have some kind of translation device. "I am King Vorthak, ruler of the Zenthari Empire. You have been brought here for a purpose." Jake stood straight and looked the king in the eye. "Captain Jake Sullivan, Earth Defense Force, service number 77492 Alpha." King Vorthak made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your war is over, Captain Sullivan. Your fleet has retreated and left you behind. But I did not bring you here to discuss military matters. I have a different problem that requires human solutions." The wall became solid again, and Jake heard mechanical sounds. A section of the wall slid open, and the 3 Zenthari entered his cell. Up close, they were even more impressive. King Vorthak towered over Jake by at least 2 feet, and his 4 arms looked strong enough to crush a human without effort. "My daughter," King Vorthak said, and his voice carried something Jake recognized as shame. "Princess Kaleth is weak. By our standards, she is a failure and brings dishonor to the royal bloodline. In our culture, strength is everything. The weak do not deserve to live." Jake frowned. "What does this have to do with me? Humans are weak by our standards, yet you fight with courage and skill that surprises us. Your species has survived and even thrived despite your physical limitations. I want you to teach my daughter to be strong like humans are strong." One of the other Zenthari stepped forward. This one wore the armor of a general, and his black eyes showed anger. "My king, this is foolish. The princess cannot be saved. She should be put out of her misery, and you should name a new heir." King Vorthak turned those black eyes on the general, and Jake saw real fury there. "General Thrakus, you forget yourself. Kaleth is my daughter, and I will decide her fate." Jake looked between the 2 aliens and realized he was witnessing some kind of political tension. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Train her," King Vorthak said simply. "Make her strong. Do this and your treatment as a prisoner will be comfortable. Refuse and you will be executed as a war criminal." Jake considered his options. He could refuse and die, or he could agree and maybe find a way to escape later. Plus, he was curious about this alien princess who was considered weak by her own people. "I agree, but I need to meet her first. I cannot train someone I have never seen." King Vorthak nodded. "You will meet her tomorrow. But understand this, human. If you fail, if my daughter remains weak, then both of you will die. I am giving you one chance to prove that human methods can succeed where Zenthari traditions have failed." The next day, Jake was taken from his cell and led through long corridors filled with Zenthari soldiers. They all stared at him with those black eyes, and Jake could feel their hostility. To them, he was an enemy and probably an insult to their warrior culture. They brought him to a large training room filled with weapons and exercise equipment sized for Zenthari bodies. Everything looked too big and too heavy for human use. Jake was studying the room when he heard a soft sound behind him. He turned around and saw her. Princess Kalith was small for a Zenthari, barely coming up to Jake's shoulder. Her purple shell was pale and seemed thin compared to the thick armor-like skin of the other Zenthari he had seen. She moved carefully like someone who expected to be hurt, and her large eyes darted around nervously. "You are the human," she said in a voice so quiet Jake had to strain to hear her. "My father says you will make me strong." Jake looked at this frightened creature and felt something he had not expected. Pity mixed with determination. She reminded him of new recruits he had trained back on Earth. Young soldiers who came to basic training scared and unsure of themselves. "What is your name?" Jake asked gently. "Kalith," she whispered, "but most call me the Broken Princess." "Well, Kalith, I am Jake Sullivan, and I do not think you are broken. Different maybe, but not broken." For the first time since he had been captured, Jake felt hope. Not hope for escape, but hope for something more interesting. This small alien princess was scared and weak by her people's standards, but Jake had spent years turning scared, weak humans into confident soldiers. Maybe the same methods would work here. Two Zenthari guards stood at the edges of the room watching everything. One of them spoke in their clicking language, and Kalith flinched as if she had been hit. Jake did not need a translation to know it. "Had been cruel. Ignore them," Jake said firmly. "From now on, the only opinion that matters is yours and mine. Are you ready to begin?" Kalith looked at him with surprise. No one had ever asked her if she was ready for anything. They had only told her what she could not do, and what a disappointment she was. "I am ready," she said, and for the first time. Her voice had a tiny bit of strength in it. Jake smiled. This was going to be interesting. Jake watched Princess Kalith try to lift a practice sword that was clearly too heavy for her small frame. The weapon was designed for Zenthari warriors who had 4 arms and massive strength. In Kalith's 2 hands, it looked ridiculous, and she could barely get it off the ground. The guards at the edge of the training room made clicking sounds that Jake was learning meant laughter. One of them said something in their language, and Kalith dropped the sword completely. Her pale shell seemed to get even paler, and she looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Stop," Jake said firmly. He walked over and picked up the heavy sword easily, despite being much smaller than a normal Zenthari. "This weapon is wrong for you. In human military training, we learned that every soldier needs the right tools for their abilities." Kalith looked confused. "But these are the training weapons. All young Zenthari must learn to use them." "All young Zenthari are not you," Jake replied. "You are different, so you need different methods. Sit down." Kalith sat on the floor and looked up at him with those large black eyes. Jake sat across from her and began the first real lesson. "On my planet Earth, we have a saying. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. Do you understand what this means?" Kalith shook her head. "It means everyone has different strengths. Your people value physical power above everything else, but there are other kinds of strength. Speed, intelligence, cunning, patience. These can be just as powerful as raw muscle." Jake spent the next hour teaching Kalith breathing exercises he had learned in his military training. Simple techniques to calm the mind and control fear. At first, she was resistant, claiming that such things were not part of Zenthari warrior tradition. "Your tradition has not worked for you," Jake pointed out. "Maybe it is time to try something new." Slowly, Kalith began to follow his instructions. She learned to breathe deeply and slowly. She learned to quiet the nervous energy that made her hands shake. The guards grew bored and stopped paying close attention, which was exactly what Jake wanted. Over the following days, Jake continued these mental exercises. He told Kalith stories from Earth history about underdogs who achieved great things. He told her about David, who defeated the giant Goliath with just a stone and a sling. He told her about small armies that beat much larger forces through clever tactics. "Size and strength matter," Jake explained, "but they are not everything. Sometimes being small is an advantage. You can move faster, hide, easier, strike where your enemy does not expect. Kaleth listened to every word. For the first time in her life, someone was telling her that being different might actually be useful. The idea was strange and exciting. Jake began to incorporate simple physical exercises into their training. Not the brutal strength-building routines that other Zenthari used, but movements focused on speed balance and precision. He taught her to dodge and weave, to move like water flowing around obstacles. Your people fight like hammers, Jake said as he demonstrated a flowing movement that turned an opponent's strength against them. But you can fight like water. Water always finds a way around the hardest rock. The change was gradual but noticeable. Kaleth began to stand straighter. Her voice grew slightly stronger. She stopped flinching every time someone spoke harshly to her. The guards noticed, and some began to show grudging respect, while others became more hostile. General Thrakus visited the training room one day and watched Kaleth practice the flowing movements Jake had taught her. His black eyes showed disapproval. "This is not Zenthari combat," he said in his clicking voice. "You are teaching her alien weaknesses, not strength." "I am teaching her to use what she has," Jake replied calmly. "Every warrior must work with their natural abilities." General Thrakus made a dismissive gesture with two of his forearms. "Natural abilities? She has no natural abilities except failure. My king wastes his time and risks dishonor by allowing this charade to continue." After the general left, Kaleth was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "He is right, you know. I am a failure. Everyone says so." Jake stopped what he was doing and looked at her seriously. "Princess, let me tell you something about humans. We are the weakest intelligent species we have ever encountered. Every alien race we have met is stronger, faster, or tougher than we are. By your logic, we should all be failures." "But humans are successful," Kaleth said, confused. "You have spread across many worlds, and your military is feared even by us." "Exactly," Jake said with a smile. "We succeeded not because we were strong, but because we refused to accept that weakness meant failure. We found other ways to win. We used our minds, our creativity, our ability to work together. Strength comes in many forms." This conversation marked a turning point. Kaleth began to train with real enthusiasm instead of just going through the motions. She practiced the flowing movements until they became natural. She learned to strike quickly at precise targets instead of trying to overpower opponents. Jake introduced her to human concepts of tactical thinking. Instead of charging straight at problems, she learned to circle around them to find weaknesses and exploit them. She began to understand that a small, precise action could be more effective than a large, clumsy one. The other Zenthari in the palace began to notice the changes. Kaleth walked differently now, with confidence instead of shame. She spoke up in conversations instead of staying silent. When guards made cruel comments, she no longer collapsed in tears, but met their eyes steadily. Some of the younger Zenthari soldiers became curious about what the human was teaching the princess. They had never seen combat techniques like the ones Kaleth was learning. A few even asked quiet questions about human fighting methods, though they were careful not to let their superiors hear. King Vorthak visited the training room more frequently, and Jake could see satisfaction in those alien features. The princess was still small by Zenthari standards, but she carried herself like a warrior now. The shame and fear that had defined her were fading. "You have done something unexpected, human," the king said one day after watching Kaleth demonstrate a complex series of defensive movements. "My daughter is becoming someone I do not recognize, but someone I respect." But not everyone was pleased with the changes. General Thrakus and his supporters saw Kaleth's transformation as a threat to the traditional order. If a weak princess could become strong through human methods, what did that say about their entire culture? Jake began to realize that training Kaleth was about more than just one alien princess. He was challenging the fundamental beliefs of an entire civilization. Every lesson, every improvement was proof that the Zenthari way was not the only way. The real test would come when Kaleth had to prove herself in actual combat. Training room. Exercises were one thing, but real fights were something else entirely. Jake knew that day was coming soon, and he hoped he had given her enough tools to survive it. Late at night, when the guards thought he was sleeping, Jake would practice his own combat forms. He had a feeling that teaching Caliph to fight might eventually mean fighting alongside her. The political tensions in the palace were growing, and General Thrakus was becoming more openly hostile to both the princess and her human teacher. Change was coming to the Zenthari Empire whether they wanted it or not, and Jake was determined that both he and Caliph would be ready for whatever came next. The alarm that woke Jake was different from anything he had heard before. Instead of the usual mechanical sounds, this one had an urgent organic quality that made his skin crawl. Guards rushed through the corridors, and he could hear the clicking, voices of Zenthari speaking rapidly to each other. Caliph arrived at the training room earlier than usual, and Jake could see worry in her large black eyes. "There is trouble in the outer systems," she said without her usual greeting. "Rebels have captured the colony ship Heart of Zenthar with over 3,000 civilians aboard." Jake frowned. "Rebels? I thought your empire was united." "Mostly, but there are always some who resist central authority. These rebels call themselves the Free Claws, and they hate the royal family. Their leader is a warrior named Bruton, who has killed many Imperial soldiers." The training session was interrupted when King Vorthak entered with several of his advisors, including General Thrakus. The king looked grim, and his four arms moved restlessly as he spoke. "The rebel leader has made a demand," Vorthak said. "He challenges a member of the royal family to single combat. If we accept and our champion wins, the civilians will be released. If we refuse, or if our champion loses, the ship will be destroyed." General Thrakus stepped forward. "My king, I volunteer to face this rebel scum. My strength and skill are well known throughout the empire." "Bruton specifically demanded a member of the royal bloodline," the king replied. "He wishes to humiliate us by killing someone of royal blood in front of the entire galaxy. The combat will be broadcast across Zenthari space." Jake saw where this was heading, and he did not like it. There was only one member of the royal family young enough and expendable enough to be sent into such obvious danger. "Father?" Caliph said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. "I will go." The room erupted in shocked clicking and chittering. Several advisors began speaking at once, while General Thrakus made a sound of pure disbelief. "Impossible," Thrakus declared. "The princess would be slaughtered within moments. It would be a disgrace that would haunt our empire forever. Better a quick death in combat than slow execution of thousands of innocent civilians," Caliph replied, and Jake felt proud of the steel in her voice. King Vorthak studied his daughter for a long moment. Jake could see the conflict in his alien features. Love for his child warred with duty to his people and fear of the consequences. "Princess," one of the advisors said carefully, "this rebel Bruton has killed over 50 warriors in single combat. He is twice your size and has trained in violence since birth. This would not be a battle, it would be an execution." "Then perhaps," Caliph said, looking directly at her father, "it is time to show the galaxy that Zenthari strength comes in more forms than just size and brutality." The argument continued for over an hour, but in the end, political necessity won. The Empire could not be seen backing down from a challenge, and there was no other royal family member available. General Thrakus was too valuable and too obviously not of royal blood, despite his ambitions. 3 days later, Jake found himself aboard a Zenthari warship heading for the neutral space station where the combat would take place. He had been allowed to accompany Caliph as her advisor and trainer, which was an honor he was not sure he wanted. "Are you afraid?" Jake asked, as they stood in her quarters looking out at the stars. Caliph considered the question seriously. "Yes, but not of dying. I am afraid of failing. If I lose, those people will die, and everyone will say that it proves the princess was always weak and worthless." "You are not weak," Jake said firmly. "You have learned everything I can teach you and added your own improvements. You move like smoke and strike like lightning. Bruton may be bigger and stronger, but he has never faced an opponent like you, a bow." Space station where the combat would occur was old and neutral territory, run by traders who cared nothing for politics. The main arena was designed for exactly this kind of spectacle and could hold thousands of spectators. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to watch the daughter of the Zenthari king face the rebel champion. Jake got his first look at Bruton when the rebel delegation arrived, and his heart sank. The warrior was massive, even by Zenthari. standards with scars covering his thick shell and 4 arms that looked like they could crush steel. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. "Look at him," Kaleth whispered as they watched Bruton address his supporters. "He is everything a Zenthari warrior should be." "No," Jake replied. "He is everything a traditional Zenthari warrior should be. You are something new." The night before the combat, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking of all the things he should have taught Kaleth, all the techniques and strategies they had not had time to practice. In the morning, she would face a killer, who outweighed her by hundreds of pounds and had decades more experience. When dawn came, Jake accompanied Kaleth to the preparation chamber. She moved through her warm-up routine with calm precision, showing none of the nervousness that was eating at his stomach. "Remember," Jake said as they walked toward the arena, "you cannot match his strength, so do not try. Use his size against him. Big opponents are usually slow opponents. Make him chase you, tire him out, then strike when he makes a mistake." The arena was packed with spectators, and the noise was overwhelming. Most of the crowd was clearly expecting a quick execution, followed by the destruction of the colony ship. Jake saw betting displays showing odds of over 50-1 against Kaleth. Bruton entered first, and the crowd roared approval. He was even more impressive in full combat gear with weapons attached to all 4 arms. He raised those arms and bellowed a challenge that shook the arena. Then Kaleth walked out, and the crowd fell silent. She looked tiny in the vast arena, wearing simple light armor and carrying weapons sized for her frame. But she walked with her head high, and Jake could see none of the fear that had once defined her. "Citizens of the galaxy," the announcer declared, "you witnessed today a challenge of honor between Bruton of the Freeclaws and Princess Kaleth of the Royal House." Bruton laughed and called out in a voice everyone could hear. "Little princess, I will make your death quick if you kneel now and beg for mercy." Kaleth looked up at the massive warrior and spoke in a clear, calm voice that carried throughout the arena. "I am Kaleth, daughter of Vorthak, and I do not kneel to murderers of innocence." The combat began with Bruton charging forward like a living battering ram. His 4 arms swung massive weapons in wide arcs, meant to crush anything in their path. The crowd expected Kaleth to be flattened within seconds. Instead, she simply was not there. She flowed to the side like water around a rock, and Bruton crashed into the arena wall. The impact was tremendous, and chunks of stone fell from where his body hit. The crowd gasped as Kaleth spun and struck at precise points on Bruton's exposed back. Her weapons found gaps in his armor and nerve clusters that Jake had taught her to target. The big warrior roared in pain and surprise. For the next 10 minutes, the arena witnessed something that had never been seen before. Kaleth fought like smoke and shadow, never where Bruton expected, never trying to match his strength. She hit and moved, struck and faded, dancing around his increasingly wild attacks. Bruton grew frustrated and his movements became sloppy. He relied so much on intimidation and raw power that he had no answer for an opponent who refused to engage him directly. His breathing became labored as he chased Kaleth around the arena. The end came suddenly. Bruton charged again with all, his remaining strength intending to finally corner his elusive opponent. Kaleth waited until the last possible second, then dropped low and swept his legs with a move Jake had taught her months ago. The massive warrior crashed to the ground with tremendous force. Before he could recover, Kaleth was on him, her weapon at his throat in the exact spot Jake had shown her where a single precise strike could end a Zenthari life. The arena was completely silent. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. The weak princess had defeated the legendary champion without taking a single serious wound. "Yield," Kaleth said in a voice that carried throughout the arena. Bruton looked up at her with shock and something that might have been respect. "I yield," he whispered. The crowd exploded into noise as Jake felt tears in his eyes. His student had not just won, she had won with such skill and grace that even her enemies had to acknowledge her prowess. The colony ship would be saved, and Kaleth had proven that strength truly came in many forms. But as Jake watched General Thrakus in the royal viewing box, he saw something that worried him. The general was not celebrating his princess's victory. Instead, his black eyes showed calculation and what looked like growing alarm. The victory was complete, but Jake suspected it was only the beginning of their troubles. The return to the Zenthari homeworld was unlike anything Jake had expected. Crowds lined the streets as Princess Kaleth's transport moved through the capital city. Thousands of Zenthari who had watched the broadcast of her victory came to see. The princess who had redefined what it meant to be a warrior. But not all the attention was positive. Jake could see groups of traditional warriors standing apart from the cheering crowds, their black eyes showing disapproval and anger. These were Zenthari who believed that Kaleth's victory was somehow an insult to their ancient ways of combat. "They are afraid," Kaleth said quietly as she watched the mixed reactions from their transport window. "For centuries our people have believed that only size and brute strength matter in combat. My victory challenges everything they think they know about warfare." Jake nodded grimly. "Change is never easy, especially when it threatens people's sense of identity. Your success makes some warriors question their own worth." The political consequences became clear within days of their return. Young Zenthari from across the Empire began requesting training in what they called princess combat techniques. Many of these were individuals who had been dismissed as too weak or small for traditional warrior training. General Thrakus called for a meeting of the High Council to address what he called the corruption of Zenthari military traditions. Jake was not allowed to attend, but Kaleth described the heated arguments that followed. "Thrakus claims that human fighting methods are making our people weak," she reported. "He says that if we abandon our traditional strength-based training, we will become vulnerable to enemies who still value power above all else." King Vorthak found himself caught between competing pressures. Conservative elements led by General Thrakus demanded an end to the experimental training programs, while younger Zenthari pushed for more opportunities to learn the new techniques. The crisis deepened when reports arrived from border worlds. Traditional Zenthari commanders were struggling to adapt to new rebel tactics that seemed inspired by Kaleth's victory over Bruton. The rebels were using hit-and-run attacks, precision strikes, and guerrilla warfare instead of the direct confrontations that Zenthari forces were trained for. "The Empire is changing," Jake observed during one of his increasingly rare training sessions with Kaleth. "Your victory did more than save one colony ship. It started a revolution in military thinking. But the revolution faced serious opposition. General Thrakus began restricting Jake's access to the princess, claiming that too much human influence was dangerous for her development as a future leader. Their training sessions were cut from daily to twice weekly then to once weekly. "He is trying to separate us," Kaleth said with frustration after another canceled session. "Thrakus believes that if he can limit your influence, I will gradually return to traditional ways." Jake had been expecting this. From the beginning, he had known that success would bring its own dangers. Powerful people rarely welcomed changes that threatened their authority, and General Thrakus was clearly positioning himself as the defender of Zenthari traditions. The situation became more serious when intelligence reports revealed that a human fleet had been detected at the edge of Zenthari space. Earth's military had apparently tracked Jake's location and was demanding his return under threat of war. "This is perfect for Thrakus," Kaleth explained during one of their secret meetings. "He can claim that you were always a spy sent to weaken our empire from within. Your influence on me becomes evidence of human treachery." Jake realized that his presence was becoming a liability for both Kaleth and King Vorthak. The political situation was deteriorating rapidly, and he was the obvious scapegoat for everyone's fears about change. The end came suddenly. Jake was moved from his comfortable quarters to a maximum security prison cell deep in the palace basement. Guards informed him that General Thrakus had convinced the king that housing an enemy agent so close to the royal family was too dangerous. "This is temporary," King Vorthak said when he visited Jake in his new prison. "Until the political situation stabilizes, you must remain isolated from my daughter." "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, "General Thrakus is not trying to protect Zenthari traditions. He is positioning himself to seize power. My imprisonment is just the first step." The king's black eyes showed uncertainty. "Thrakus has served my family loyally for decades. He would never betray us." "Ambitious men often hide their true intentions behind claims of loyalty and tradition," Jake replied. "Watch him carefully, Your Majesty. I suspect his next move will be against Princess Kaleth herself." Left alone in his cell, Jake could only wait and worry. He had taught Kaleth everything he could, but she was still young and inexperienced in political warfare. General Thrakus had decades of experience in palace intrigue and would not hesitate to use any method to achieve his goals. Days passed with no word from the outside world. Jake's only contact was with guards who brought food and refused to answer questions. The silence was worse than any torture because it meant he had no way to know if Calith was safe. The crisis exploded when the human fleet moved closer to Zenthari space and issued an ultimatum. They demanded Jake's immediate release and safe return to Earth, or they would consider his continued imprisonment an act of war. The deadline was set for 7 days. General Thrakus used the ultimatum to justify emergency powers. He convinced the Royal Council that King Vorthak was too emotionally compromised by his daughter's relationship with the human prisoner to make clear decisions. Reluctantly, the Council granted Thrakus temporary authority to handle the crisis. Jake learned about these developments from Princess Calith, who managed to visit him in secret. She had disguised herself as a servant and bribed guards to gain access to the prison level. "Thrakus has moved against my father," she whispered urgently. "He claims that harboring you has brought the Empire to the brink of war with humanity. The Council has given him emergency powers, and he is using them to consolidate control." "What about you?" Jake asked. "Are you safe?" "For now, but Thrakus has suggested that I need re-education to remove human influences from my thinking. He wants to send me to a military academy on a distant world where I can learn proper Zenthari values." Jake felt cold dread in his stomach. "That is not re-education, Princess. That is exile or worse. Once you are away from the capital, Thrakus can claim you died in an accident or training mishap. With you gone, he becomes the logical heir to your father's throne." Calith nodded grimly. "I know. That is why I am not going. My followers and I are preparing to resist, but we are few and poorly equipped. Most of the military supports Thrakus because he represents the old ways they understand." "How many followers do you have?" Jake asked. "Perhaps 200 mostly young warriors who have learned the new fighting techniques. We also have some support among the civilian population, especially those who have been marginalized by traditional Zenthari society." Jake thought quickly. 200 followers against the might of the Zenthari military seemed hopeless, but he had seen impossible odds overcome before. "Princess, you cannot win a conventional war against Thrakus, but you might win an unconventional one. Use the same tactics that worked against Bruton. Strike quickly at unexpected targets. Make Thrakus chase you while you choose when and where to fight." "A rebellion, then," Calith said. "My own people will call me a traitor to the Empire." "Sometimes being a traitor to a corrupt system is the most loyal thing you can do," Jake replied. "Your father trusted you to protect the Empire's future. If that means fighting those who would destroy it from within, then that is what you must do." Calith gripped his hand through the prison bars. "I wish you could fight beside me, teacher." "You do not need me anymore," Jake said with pride. "You have become everything I hoped you could be and more. Now go and show the galaxy what true Zenthari strength looks like." After she left, Jake sat alone in his cell and wondered if he would ever see her again. The next few days would determine the fate of the entire Zenthari Empire and possibly the future of human-Zenthari relations. Everything now depended on whether a small alien princess could overcome impossible odds using the lessons he had taught her about turning weakness into strength. Jake heard the distant sound of explosions and knew that Princess Calith had begun her rebellion. From his prison cell deep in the palace, he could only listen and wonder what was happening in the world above. The sounds grew closer over the following hours, and he realized that whatever Calith was doing, it was working. General Thrakus had expected a conventional uprising that he could crush with overwhelming force. Instead, Calith and her followers struck like ghosts hitting supply lines, communication centers, and isolated outposts before vanishing back into the shadows. They avoided direct confrontation with superior forces and focused on disrupting the general's ability to coordinate his troops. The first sign that the rebellion was succeeding came when the lights in Jake's cell began flickering. Power systems throughout the capital were being sabotaged by small teams that struck quickly and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Thrakus found himself fighting an enemy that refused to stand still long enough to be destroyed. On the third day of fighting, Jake's cell door opened and a familiar figure stepped inside. Princess Kaleth looked older than when he had last seen her, and her armor showed signs of recent combat. Behind her stood several young Zenthari warriors who watched the corridors with alert eyes. "Teacher?" she said with a tired smile. "It is time to go." Jake stood up quickly. "How did you get in here? This place is supposed to be the most secure prison in the Empire." "It is, but security designed to keep people in is not always good at keeping people out. My followers and I have been studying the palace defenses for weeks. We know